Okay, good morning, class. So today we want to look at new criticism. New criticism. New criticism goes by other names. You can call it formalism. You can call it modernism. You can call it aesthetic criticism. So it's not all the time that you hear new criticism. Sometimes you hear modernism. Sometimes you hear aesthetic criticism. Sometimes you come across it as formalism. So you need to take note of these other names that new criticism goes by. New criticism is a text-only criticism. It's a text-only criticism. In the sense that it focuses attention only on the literary work. In the sense that it focuses attention only on the literary work and tries to make sense of the literary work by paying attention only to its language and structures. And by paying attention only to its language and organizational structures in order to make sense of it or make meaning out of it. That implies that in new criticism, we do not draw material from the extra-literary world. In new criticism, we do not draw materials from the extra-literary world. We do not take information outside the text. We do not need information outside the text in order to interpret the text. We only pay attention to the text before us because within the hermeneutics of new criticism, it is believed that the text is independent. Within the hermeneutics of new criticism, it is believed that the text is independent. So the text is seen as independent and complete on its own. The text is seen as independent and complete on its own. It emphasizes the organic wholeness of the text. New criticism emphasizes the organic wholeness of a text. That is why we do not need any outside information in order to determine the meaning of the text in new criticism. We do not need any outside information because the text is complete on its own. then we can examine it and only it in order to know what it means. That is why we say that new criticism is one of the text-only criticism that we have. In fact, it is also called objective criticism. It's also one of the approaches in objective criticism. It can also be called the linguistic or a linguistic theory of a text, of literature. Neo-criticism is one of the linguistic theories of literature because it pays attention to the language of the text in order to determine its meaning. Neo-criticism is one of the linguistic theories of literature. It is one of the theories that examine language in a text in order to determine its meaning. That's what we mean linguistic theory. It pays attention to language in order to determine its meaning. The following are the proponents of new criticism. Some of them are called some of them are called formalists. So I've said, so whether they call themselves formalists, you should know that we are still talking about new criticism. Some of them were formalists and later became structuralists because new criticism and structuralism share commonalities, especially in terms of the fact that they pay attention to the language of the text in order to determine its meaning. That there are linguistic theories in literature. So we have Glenn Brooks as one of the proponents of formalism. We have I. Richards. Most of the time you find his name spelled or written that way, I. Richards. I means Ivor, then A means Armstrong. Ivor, Armstrong, Richard. So we have Rene Welleck. Rene Welleck. As another proponent of new criticism. We have W.K. Wimsatt. W.K. Wimsatt. W.K. Wimsatt, where W stands for William and K. Kurtz. They have Wimsatt. K is for Kurtz. Right? K is for Kurtz. And then you have John Crow Ransom. John Crow Ransom. John Crow Ransom. Then we have R.P. Blackman. R.P. Blackman. R.P. Blackman. R.P. Blackman. where R stands for Richard and P for Palmer. All right? Where R stands for Richard and P for Palmer. This is Palmer. All right? Happy black man. Black man. All right, so we have, as we already said, neo-criticism goes by other names. You can also call it textual criticism because it pays attention to the text. That's why it is text-only criticism. Textual criticism. You can also call it ontological criticism. Ontological criticism. All right? Ontological criticism. Among other names. Literary theories usually have some important terminologies that help us understand them better. Literary theories usually have some key terms or concepts that will usually help us to understand the theory better. And for neo-criticism, we have 4 such terms. And for neo-criticism, we have 4 such terms. We have 4 of such terms. One is intentional fallacy. Intentional fallacy. Intentional fallacy. 2 is affective fallacy. Affective fallacy. 3 is heresy of paraphrase. Heresy of paraphrase. 4 is objective correlative. Objective correlative. Or objective correlative. 4 key concepts in neo-criticism. 1, intentional fallacy. 2, affective fallacy. 3, heresy of paraphrase. And 4, objective correlative. Now, so let us begin by looking at intentional fallacy. Intentional fallacy is the belief that the author usually has an intended meaning. That a text usually has a meaning intended by the author. In intentional fallacy, we believe that the author usually has a meaning that he intends, and that this meaning is in the text. But it should be noted that neo-criticism does not believe in this belief. Neo-criticism does not believe in this belief. Okay? Does not believe in this belief. Neo-criticism does not believe in this belief. In other words, In new criticism, we do not believe in the meaning as intended by the author. We do not believe in the meaning as intended by the author. And so the critic is not looking for the meaning intended by the author when studying the text, if the critic is a formalist or a new critic. Because the person who practices new criticism is a new critic, right? Remember, Eliot has said that emotions recollected in tranquility is an inexact formula. Because it is in romanticism that we value the author's personality and intention in the work of art. So in new criticism, which is modern, another name for modernism, we do not need the author in order for us to understand the text. In fact, the new critics, as well as the structuralists, believe in the concept called the death of the author. They believe in the concept called the death of the author. Death of the author. The death of the author is a technical term used to dismiss the relevance of the author after the work of art has been written. The author ceases to be relevant once the writing process is complete. In other words, metaphorically speaking, the author dies immediately he has finished writing the text. He has no part in determining the meaning of the text. And so we are not looking for his meaning, the meaning that he intended in the text. We believe in new criticism that the text has its own meaning, independent of the author or his intention. We believe that the text has its own meaning, independent of the author or his intention. So the death of the author. The author dies a metaphoric death merely after writing the text. So intentional fallacy is the falsehood, the false belief that a text has a meaning intended by the author. This is dismissed in the new critical hermeneutics. Let's take the second one, affective fallacy. Affective fallacy. Affective fallacy is the belief that the work of art is supposed to have an effect on the reader. And so, the reader should determine the meaning of the work based on the effect that the work of art has on him or her. Affective fallacy is the belief that the work of art is supposed to have certain effects on the reader, and so we will rely on the reader to determine what the work means in terms of how the work makes the reader feels when the reader reads it. So in formalism or in new criticism, this is bad criticism. This is bad criticism because a text meaning should not be determined by the impression that it makes on the audience. The reader cannot rely on his emotion to determine the meaning of the text. The meaning of the text has to be arrived at objectively. The meaning of the text has to be arrived at objectively and not based on individual emotion or how the individual feels. Relying on the emotion of the reader to determine the meaning of a text will lead to subjective interpretations of literature, unreliable meaning, different shapes of meaning. You will not have one meaning. You have different meanings because sometimes people can interpret the work of art based on whether they have eaten that day or not. Okay? You can interpret the work of art depending on whether somebody gave them a bad day or not. Whether they had a bad day or not will determine how they interpret the work of literature. You say, oh, I had a bad day, so this work is bad. Okay? Or my day was wonderful. Now that I'm reading this work, it's good. The work is good. All right? Unreliable interpretation of literature is what we will get when we rely on our emotion for the interpretation of the work. Okay? And so it will make the work objective. It will make the work subjective. It will make the meaning subjective. Make the meaning of the work subjective. Whereas new criticism pursues objective meaning. New criticism pursues objective meaning. The objective meaning is systematically arrived at after following certain rules of reading. Objective meaning is systematically arrived at, scientifically arrived at, after following the stipulated rules of reading the text. And by reading the text, we mean interpreting the text. So objective meaning is also called scientific meaning. It is so called because if we all follow the same principles of interpretation, the same principles of reading the text, the same rules of reading the text, it is believed that we will arrive at the same meaning. All of us will arrive at the same meaning of the text. That is why it is objective meaning. That's why it is a scientific reading of the text. We call it the scientific reading of the text. So you could see that that is different from merely having an emotional response to a work of art, which is what affective fallacy encourages, impressionistic criticism. Then we have heresy or paraphrase. Heresy or paraphrase. Let me add for art's sake. Heresy or paraphrase is another concept in new criticism. And it is the false belief that the meaning of the text will be retained. The meaning of the text will be retained even though some parts of it are modified, some words are changed or altered. The new critics, however, believe that this is not so. The new critics believe that this is not so. If you change a part of the text, that is, if you paraphrase, rewrite them in other words, in new words, in your own words, in different words, the meaning of the text would change. Remember that the new critics refer to literature as poem. They refer to literature as what? Poem. Poem. Because this idea of heresy or paraphrase really works with poetry. Especially, it's really seen in metaphysical poetry. The idea is taken from metaphysical poetry, whereby a change in even a word can alter the meaning of the entire text. So the formalists or the new critics believe that you cannot change, you cannot paraphrase a portion of a text without irreversibly altering its meaning. Without irreversibly altering its meaning. So it's an abomination, it's a sacrilege for you to think that you can alter a text. And in fact, it's a crime to change the text. It is not done. That's why it says heresy. Use a religious language to show you how serious it is. It's heresy. To think that, to even think of altering those words, of changing a text and still retain its meaning. Why is this so? This is so because the formalists have a monistic view of language. The formalists have what? A monistic view of language. The formalists have a monistic view of language. Okay? So there's a concept in philosophy that we call monism. And remember that most concepts in literature and language are imported from philosophy. Right? So from there you have the monists, and then you have monistics. So the monists, in terms of language, believe that content and form are indivisible, are one. The monists believe that. In linguistics, the monists are those who believe that there is no difference between content and form. The monists believe that there's no difference between content and form. Content and form. Remember that to study, formalism studies the form of a literary work. To study the form of a literary work means to study its language. Because language is the form. To study the form or structure of a literary work is to study the language of the text. So if somebody asks you to discuss the form of a particular text or discuss the structure of a particular text, it is asking you to pay attention to the language of the text and how the text is organized, its stylistic propensities that give it its meaning. So the monists believe that content and form are indivisible, cannot be separated. You cannot separate content from form. And what do we mean by content? What do we mean by form? Content is what the text says. Content is what the text says, the meaning of the text, and form is how it says it. Content is what the text says, and form is how it says it. Content is the theme of the text. Content is the theme of the text. Form is the language of the text. How language is used is form. So, by the monistic view of language, we mean that there's no difference between what the text says and how the text says it. Meaning that if you change the form of the text, you definitely change what it says. Okay? If you try to alter the language of the text, you will definitely affect its meaning. So because of this, we have what we call heresy or paraphrase in the formalist hermeneutics, meaning that you cannot alter a text, paraphrase a text, and still expect to have the same meaning. Okay? The dualists, on the other hand, believe in the separation between content and form. We have the dualists. The dualists believe in the dualists. We have monism, we have dualism from philosophy, imported into language. The dualists believe that there's a separation between what? Content and form. The dualists believe that there's a separation between content and form. Meaning that in dualism, in the dualist view of language, you can actually alter the language of the text without changing much of the meaning. You can paraphrase. But because there is a separation between content and form. But in monist view of the text, in the monistic view of the text, that is not possible. And so I say that the formalists have a monistic view of literature. Okay, so let us look at objective correlative. Objective correlative. I think that Eliot uses this term too in traditional and individual talents. So it is a core concept in new criticism. It's a core concept in new criticism because it explains how the critic arrives at meaning in the text and how emotion in a work of art should be understood from the formalist perspective. So objective correlative refers to a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events. Objective correlative refers to a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events, which shall be the formula of that particular emotion. Which shall be the formula of that particular emotion. Semicolon, such that when the external facts, which must terminate in sensory experience, are given, the emotion is immediately evoked. Such that when the external facts, which must terminate in sensory experience, are given, the emotion is immediately evoked. After that again, objective correlative refers to a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events, which shall be the formula of that particular emotion, such that when the external facts, which must terminate in sensory experience, are given, the emotion is immediately evoked. So objective quality refers to the artistic and literary technique. Objective qualitative. So that is how Eliot defines objective qualitative. T.S. Eliot defines objective qualitative, okay, as a set of objects that represent a particular emotion. So that immediately you see that those objects, in how they are carefully arranged in literature, it will evoke that emotion. The emotion is not given on a gold platter. It is based on imagery. For instance, if you need to evoke sympathy or sadness, you need to select your images. Okay? For instance, if you need to talk about death, then you probably need to talk about coffin. To mention coffin, you need to mention cups. You need to anchor your explanation, your narration on certain key images that will evoke the same emotion that you're looking for. You cannot be a random choice of objects to discuss. So that's the scientific view of literature. In other words, if you have to make somebody sad, select images that are usually known to evoke sadness. Select your words. So objective quality refers to the artistic and literary techniques of representing or evoking a particular emotion by means of symbols. By means of symbols, which become indicative of that emotion and are associated with it. I'll take that again. Objective qualitative refers to the artistic and literary technique of representing or evoking a particular emotion by means of symbols, which become indicative of that emotion and are associated with it. So it is as if there is a scientific way of achieving certain emotion, which cannot be done if the individual is haphazard and random. As I've said, if you want to talk about death, you might need to mention coffin, you might need to mention cups. You might need to evoke symbols that are related to death. Same way, if you want to make people happy or smile, you need to select your images. Mostly if you study jokes, you see a careful selection of laughable objects or images. Based on the description of the author, the audience will have images in their minds that will make them laugh. Without that, laughter cannot take place without evoking the right images, the right symbols. So, which is why it takes us back to the idea that in new criticism, we pay attention to the language of the text in order to get at its meaning. Let's look at art for art's sake. So art for art's sake is a term used in modernism or modernist criticism or new criticism to indicate how literature is insulated from social or political occurrences. It's a term used to describe how literature and its criticism should be insulated from social concerns. Literature exists only for its primary purpose, which is that of entertainment. It does not aim to wage any war in society. It does not aim to fight any battles in society. We do not attempt to link whatever happens in the work of literature to the socio-political issues in society as far as the new critics are concerned. We do not attempt to link the issues raised in literature, the events depicted in literature, to the extra-literary world. It's not the concern of literature as far as the new critics are concerned. Whatever the author documents in the text is for the sake of art, which is for entertainment, for enjoyment. It is never to make us go and fight with anybody in society. The literature does not aim to wage any battle. In the social world, that is the concept of art for art's sake. Of course, you need to understand that in today's criticism, art for art's sake has become irrelevant because literature is now socially committed. Literature is now socially committed, but if you are a new critic or if you are operating within the hermeneutics of the new critics, if you are asked to approach a text as a new critic, you are going to adopt the art for art's sake principle, which is that you pay attention to the text without paying attention to anything going on in society. So, how does a new critic approach a literary text? With all that we've known, all that we've said, how should a new critic, which is you, approach a literary text? Remember that the new critic operates based on laid down rules. And so, we are going to talk about these rules so that when each of you follows the rule, you arrive at the same meaning of the text. So, number one, the new critic should carry out a close reading of the text. A close reading of the text. The new critic should carry out a close reading of the text. A close reading is a critical reading. Remember that in criticism, reading means interpretation. But in this sense, reading is both literal and figurative, because you actually have to read the text in order to interpret it. So reading implies at once the art of reading, literally, and interpretation. So a close reading of the text is a careful reading of the text. It's a critical reading of the text. It's a kind of reading that's done with thoughtfulness. A kind of reading done with thoughtfulness. As one reads, one is asking questions, one is conscious of what the person is reading. Okay? It's not a kind of reading that you read and then it's evaporating from the head. I mean, nothing stays. Because as you read, you are asking questions, you are determining what the text means. So you cannot interpret a text without reading it. This is the basic rule of literature. If you have not read it, you cannot interpret it. Let's be honest to ourselves. For once in this life. If you have not read it, you cannot say what it is, cannot determine its meaning. So, as a student of literature, you must begin your interpretation of literature by, first of all, reading it. And when we mean reading it, we mean reading it, right? By actually reading it. Okay? Through reading it. We have to read the text word by word from the beginning to the end. That's what we mean. Okay? Not your own way of reading, that you start from the beginning and then you go to the end to know how it ends. So we don't know what happens in the middle. So reading where you skip some pages, that's not reading. Okay? And so if you have not read the text cover to cover, don't even try to interpret it, because you might make a blunder, you might make a mistake. This is very important. Every interpretation of literature begins with a close reading. And if you've not read it, then don't bother yourself trying to say what it means, trying to interpret it. Right? So the reading itself is interpretation. So a conscious reader is one who takes down notes as he reads, or as she reads. A conscious reader is one who takes down notes as he or she reads. As they read, they take down notes. Of portions of the text that are important to them, or they think is critical to the meaning of the text. Of words that are significant to the meaning of the text. Of expressions that are significant to the meaning of the text. Of the important features of the text. As they read, they take down these notes. Because everything begins with reading. If you miss the reading, then you miss the interpretation. Most formalist critics do not read the text once. Some read twice. Some read 3 times. The reason is that each time that you read the text, you gain a perspective. Each time you read the text again, you gain a perspective. You have more understanding. You have more experience. And the more experience you have with the material, with the text, the better your semantic clarity. So you should also remember that not everyone has the same intellectual ability in reading. So some people might read it once and understand, while others need to do it twice or 3 times or more. Okay? And some people might never understand, no matter how many times they read. This is still a fact of life. Alright? It's still a fact of life that we have to appreciate. But in some cases, we have those souls who might read as many times as they would, but the meaning is not there. Okay? But of course, we do not have those set of people among us, because we are very brilliant students. Okay? So the next step let us take that we are studying a poem, literally, from the formalist perspective. You can write a note about the author, even though it will not determine the meaning of the text. You can write a note about the author, even though it will not determine the meaning of the text. So at least you need to know who the author is, where your shoe is from, some basic information about the author. You can also write a note about the text background, even though it will not determine the meaning of the text in the long run. So you need to note that. The next thing is that you want to talk about the subject matter of the text. You want to talk about the subject matter of the text, what the text is all about. You want to talk about the organization of the text. Sometimes the organization of the text determines its meaning. For instance, if a poem has 14 lines, it's likely going to be a sonnet. If it's a sonnet, then all the rules for a sonnet will apply. So the organization of the text is important. So you describe the organization of the text. The text has 15 chapters. The text has 4 stanzas. Each stanza has 5 lines, depending on what you see. Because formalist criticism is evidence-based. Evidence-based. Whatever you say, you have to make sure that you can account for it. Then you can also go on to do analysis of the structure and organization of the text. Structural analysis. If it's a poem, you can do a line-by-line analysis, stanza-by-stanza analysis. If it is drama, you can do scene-by-scene analysis, act-by-act analysis. It's a prose work, you can do chapter-by-chapter analysis. If it is prose, of course, you need to mention all the prose elements, the 5 of them. This prose, you need to mention the prose elements, the 5 of them, like theme, characterization, point of view, setting, subject matter, and so on. If it is a poem, you should also talk about the prosody. It's a poem, you mention the prosody. By prosody, you take into account the rhyme scheme, and the meter of the poem. I hope that those who were assigned to do a formalist analysis followed this path, followed these principles. Prosody accounts for all the sound devices, especially rhyme and meter in the poem. You should check whether the poem has, if you are dealing with a poem, whether it has rhyme scheme and what type of rhyme it is that you find in the poem. Whether it has meter, you have a ways of determining meter. Okay? So you have the other aspects of sound devices that might be implicated in prosody, like alliteration, assonance, and consonants. You need to know what these terms are, because you have to look for them in the poem. And then you have to account for the dominant images in the poem. Dominant images in the poem, or dominant imagery in the poem. Like visual imagery, tactile imagery, or factory imagery. And the rest. You could see that in all of these things, we are paying attention to the language of the text. Then we have to look at the elements of the genre that we are examining, the major elements of the genre that we are examining. For instance, in poetry, you look at the poetic elements in that poem. For instance, you can talk about whether it is a blank verse, whether it is a free verse, whether it is written in run-on line or end-stop lines. You also talk about the figures of speech in the poem. Figures of speech in the poem. We talk about symbols. Symbols. The dominant symbols in the poem. If this is a prose work, then you discuss the 5 prose elements as we've mentioned. Then you talk about the narrative techniques. You talk about the narrative techniques, like flashback, foreshadowing, humor, allusion, if it's drama, then you pay attention to the dramatic elements in the text. Because when all of these have been put together, that is when you can say that you've carried out a new critical interpretation of that work. So essentially, we can safely say that when we are studying a work from a new critical perspective, we are simply paying attention to its form and structure. And by that we mean paying attention to its language. So we pause there for new criticism.